Welcome to a journey into one of the most complex and emotionally shifting dynamics in human psychology, where a super empath does not fight with rage, does not resist with hatred, but forces the narcissist to retreat through awareness, calm, and undeniable truth. If you've ever felt like you're living in a scripted play where every line is manipulated and you're constantly trying to discern what's real, then this video is for you. Because this isn't just a story about narcissists and super empaths. It's a story of awakening, of reclaiming ownership over your mind and your heart. In the minutes ahead, we'll walk through every stage, from that initial sense that something is off, to setting boundaries, maintaining composure, speaking truth, and ultimately rising above manipulation to live a life of emotional freedom. Subscribe now if you believe in the power of awareness, healing, and emotional liberation. And don't look away, because the next few moments could very well be the turning point in your journey. To understand how a super empath can silence a narcissist, we must first dive deeper into the essence of these two drastically different psychological worlds. The narcissist lives in a world built on illusion. Their existence depends on the validation of others, and their entire identity is woven from admiration, control, and power. They are not a complete person. They are a role, a carefully constructed mask designed to earn trust, obedience, and unquestioning loyalty. The super empath is different. They don't just see, they perceive. They don't just hear words, they hear what's hidden beneath them. They're not easily swayed by appearances or sweet promises. They possess an invisible gift, the ability to see truth through layers of deception. And then at a certain point, without noise or explosion, the super empath feels that something isn't right, a conflicting expression, an overreaction, a contradiction between what's said and what's shown. They don't need physical proof. They only need that deep inner knowing. Something here is off. That moment changes everything, because once they see, they can't unsee. That awareness becomes a spotlight illuminating the subtle manipulations they use to overlook. And what's powerful is they don't react with anger. They react with conscious silence. The narcissist doesn't fear confrontation. They're used to manipulating emotions to control the narrative. But what terrifies them the most is when their opponent no longer plays the game. When the super empath no longer reacts, no longer compromises, no longer seeks to please, the narcissist feels their power draining piece by piece. Silence in this moment is no longer submission. It is a powerful retreat, a nonverbal declaration. I am no longer a puppet in this performance. And that is the beginning of deep transformation, because the super empath doesn't just escape manipulation. They begin to rebuild themselves from the ground up. They draw boundaries that are non-negotiable. They stop needing others to validate their intuition, and they begin to speak the truth, not to accuse, but to affirm their own worth. And then there comes a moment that cannot be postponed any longer. The super empath speaks their truth, not through accusations, not with shouting or tears, but in a calm, steady voice, as if they have just returned from a long journey inward and finally found the landmark of clarity. They don't have to shout, "You're a manipulator." They only have to say, "I see what's happening." And that one sentence, needing no validation, no defense, carries more weight than any argument ever could. Truth, when spoken from an awakened soul, doesn't need volume. It has its own echo, an echo that deeply unsettles the narcissist. Because in their world, truth must be distorted, must be controlled. But when the super empath speaks, not to win, but to be real, every illusion begins to crumble. The narcissist may react, they might scoff, deny, or mock. They're too sensitive. "I was just joking. You're remembering it wrong." But this time, the super empath doesn't need to argue. They don't need to convince anyone that they're right, because they've outgrown the phase of needing others to validate their experience. They know what they saw. They understand what they felt, and they have the right to speak it, even if no one believes, no one apologizes, and no one changes. That's when something miraculous happens. The super empath is no longer just surviving the pain. They step out of the entire system that once made them feel not good enough, not lovable enough, not worthy enough. Truth is not a knife to stab back. It is a key that opens a door they once believed they'd never be allowed to walk through. And when they do walk through it, what they leave behind is not resentment, but an older version of themselves, a version that once needed to be acknowledged, that once remained silent, that once tried to explain their goodness to someone who never truly listened. After the truth is spoken, a new kind of silence begins. But this time, it's not the silence of suffering, it's the silence of freedom. No more sleepless nights trying to decipher what someone else is thinking. No more imaginary conversations where you try to explain yourself just to be understood. No more pressure to prove yourself worthy of love. You, the super empath, have crossed a threshold. And on the other side, you are no longer the same. Not harder, not colder, but clearer, fuller, freer. You no longer live to prove anything. You live to breathe, to feel, to be real with yourself. And it is in that refusal to engage in emotional games that you begin to access a deeper layer of existence, rebirth. Rebirth isn't forgetting. You remember it all, but the memory no longer shakes you. You don't deny the pain. You honor it as part of the journey. You begin to love yourself not as compensation, but as a sacred responsibility. You look back not to find fault, but to find meaning. And in your eyes, others begin to see something they never noticed before, the peace that comes from truth. You don't need to tell your story to everyone. The way you walk, the way you set boundaries, the way you stay silent when necessary is a declaration in itself. Those still trapped in manipulation, guilt, and conditional love, they will notice you, not because you preach, but because your presence gives them permission to ask, do I deserve something better? I have the right to say no. Can I choose peace over pleasing others? And that is when you become a mirror of recovery, no longer a reflection of pain, but a living image of hope. You don't need justice from the one who hurt you. You've already given that justice to yourself by walking out of the storm and rebuilding your world on truth, dignity, and unconditional love for yourself. The rebirth of a super empath doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens quietly in small, powerful choices. When you choose silence over argument, when you smile and walk away instead of staying to clarify something to someone who never truly listens, when you begin to build new relationships where you don't have to sacrifice your values to be accepted. And in each of those steps, you are rewriting the definition of love, not the kind that demands your suffering for recognition, but the kind that knows when to stop, when to say no, and when to return to yourself. You no longer need to be chosen because you have chosen yourself. And that is the most courageous, sacred choice a once manipulated soul can make. You no longer live to heal the one who hurt you. You live to soothe your own heart. And in doing so, you become a lighthouse for those still drifting in the darkness of deception and emotional violence. Those who once doubted their intuition. Those who once believed kindness was weakness. Those who once lost themselves trying to hold on to a toxic relationship. They will look at you and see that freedom is real. They will see that peace isn't a luxury, it's a right, a choice. And you, through the way you live, walk, and protect your heart, are showing them that they too can dream of another life. A life no longer driven by guilt. A life no longer needing validation from the one who denied their worth. A life no longer built on if they change, but on I change how I love myself. You don't need to be the good one in someone else's story. You only need to be the truthful one in your own. And that very thing, that simple yet incredibly difficult act, becomes the most resounding victory a soul who has endured suffering could ever achieve. You didn't just survive, you rose above. And now you continue to live with a whole heart, not for anyone else, but because you are worthy. Rebirth is not just standing up after a fall. It is the moment you realize you've always had wings. You were just too busy holding on to someone who never intended to fly with you. You begin to savor the small things you once didn't realize you had lost. The sound of music unclouded by the noise of inner arguments. A peaceful afternoon, no longer shadowed by wondering, what are they mad about now? A deep sleep, undisturbed by controlling messages or silent blame. The rebirth of a super empath doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. No one has to save you anymore because you've saved yourself. No one has to validate you anymore because you've affirmed the truth within your own heart. You begin to clearly distinguish real love from emotional dependence. True love doesn't make you doubt yourself. True love doesn't make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. True love never requires you to become less sensitive, less expressive, less demanding, just to fit within the narrow limits of someone who never intended to understand you. And the miracle is you no longer feel lonely in your separation. You begin to recognize the difference between being alone and being abandoned. You realize you can be alone and still be whole. That's when creativity returns. You write again the words you once forgot. You listen again to the music you once loved. You decorate your space, not to impress, but to feel loved by yourself in your own room. Life within you begins to bloom again, no longer drained, no longer defined by someone who never truly saw you. You become the person you once needed when you were lost. And from there, you give the world a radiant version of yourself. Not perfect, but real. Not immune to pain, but no longer led by it. You no longer mistake intensity for love. You no longer think boundless sacrifice is proof of goodness. You no longer call emotional coldness strength or toxic silence peace. Your rebirth is a spiritual metamorphosis. You're not going back to start over. You're moving forward with new wisdom, a new heart, and new standards. A super empath, after walking through the darkness of manipulation and pain, doesn't emerge with scars stamped across their forehead. They don't need to say, I survived. They show it in the way they walk. Something in them has shifted. A calmness that's no longer forced, a confidence that doesn't need display, a gaze that is no longer searching for validation, but simply present. And that presence, full of awareness and kindness, has the power to heal. You might meet them in a simple conversation and feel an unspoken understanding, but they don't need to say much. They listen in a way that makes you realize, I've never been heard like this before. They're not trying to fix you, but their existence makes you believe, maybe I am enough, even while I'm still messy. Their healing doesn't come from advice, but from non-judgment. Not from empty words, but from the honest look in their eyes when they see you not as a problem to fix, but as a soul finding its way back home. People begin to feel safe around them, a rare and precious feeling. Safe to cry, safe to admit what they've never dared to say, safe to stop pretending to be strong, smart, or okay. And the strangest thing is they didn't try to create that. They didn't try to be a healer. They're simply being themselves. But that self is no longer living in fear, no longer living to please others, no longer bound by a twisted sense of goodness. The super empath, once restored, is like a garden that had burned to ash, but now blooms wildflowers. Not because someone tended to it, but because they chose to live again. And those who step into that garden, even if only to sit still, breathe, and feel the peace in the air, begin to feel hope again. Their presence is an invitation, never a demand. You don't have to live in chaos. You don't have to fight to be loved. You can stop, rest, and come back to yourself. And others, even just brushing past them, can feel that shift in frequency. Not loud, not dazzling, but true and strong enough to awaken. You are no longer the one begging to be understood, trying to please, turning a blind eye to the truth just to preserve a relationship filled with pain. You are no longer living in reaction. You are living in awareness. No longer a mirror reflecting someone else's emptiness, but a light in yourself, bright enough to illuminate your own path and that of others still finding their way. The journey you've walked was never easy. It was a journey of loss, heartbreak, and long nights wondering, where did I go wrong? But now you're no longer walking to find someone. You're walking to return into yourself, to the truth, to a peace no one can take away. You no longer need an apology to forgive. You don't need closure to move forward, because what you hold now is greater than all of that. Freedom. Freedom from manipulation. Freedom from the pressure to earn love. Freedom from the false self that believed it had to sacrifice in order to deserve. You, the super empath, have risen not just with reason, but with a heart that has learned to keep its best parts for itself. And from this moment on, you no longer live to please anyone. You live to honor your own truth.